Hello everyone, my name is Demetrius Mack and welcome to week 2 of my NFL Fantasy League Fantasy Wrath recap. Now, I want to go over a couple of things before I get started here. The first thing I want to go over, of course, is as you can see, this is a different location, and this is obviously no guests this week. I don't have any guests this week due to conflicting schedules and other various things, so I don't have any guests. I do, however, plan to have more guests throughout the year. It's just, as I stated, I believe in my first episode, and maybe even the draft, I probably won't have a guest every week, but I'll do my best to get a guest every week from the league. I'll try to do my best, but there are no guarantees of that. Second thing I want to go over is I'm going to go over a little bit of a restructuring of what the show is going to kind of be about. This time, and going forward, I want to go over more of the league. I felt like we had a very great conversation last time out, but I felt like we strayed away a lot from the league and from the league topic, and that's what this show is primarily about. It's about talking about the league, my league, Fantasy Wrath, and what's going on in it. And so therefore, I would like to spend more time focusing on that and also cutting down on the time, and I think I'm going to be able to do that with the way I handle things here today, as you guys will see in a bit. And the third thing, which might be the most important to some of you guys out there, but if you're waiting to see the result from the Isaiah Phil battle, duel, whatever you want to call it, for the bet, it has been decided Isaiah has won the bet that Drew Brees did not reach 350 yards. And now he is trying to get Phil to do the push-ups on camera. And now that he has mentioned that to Phil, and now that I've mentioned it to you guys on camera, I can almost guarantee you that that will not be happening on camera, because Phil is not the type to let that happen. Let's just leave it at that. So, without further ado, let's move in and start the show. The first thing I want to go over is we're going to go over to Game Center here, and I want to go over and look at the previous week 2, and go over what happened here. So let's take a look at week 2 real quick. Let's take a look at week 2. Let's take a look over here. What happened? This is my matchup versus the defending champion. Also someone who I lost to in the playoffs last year. And this is a very big week for me. But as you can see, my quarterback just does not rise to the occasion. He even played less. He had a worse performance than Drew Brees. That Thursday night, Matt Forte versus the Buffalo Bills, I thought that was going to be really big for me. I thought that was going to be a ginormous boost for me. It ended up being my only player that played worth a damn compared to his other players, especially when he had players like Adrian Peterson get injured for him. On the other hand, I did have Danny Woodhead get injured for me. So we both had injury players. But at the end of the day, his team just played a lot more solid, and his team got touchdowns. DeMarco Murray got a touchdown for him. Mike Wallace got a touchdown for him. I believe 2 touchdowns for him. And Greg Olsen got a long touchdown for me. Whereas me, the only person who really scored a touchdown was Andrew Luck and Antonio Gates and Matt Forte. And Antonio Gates, that's all he did. He scored a touchdown, and so therefore things did not pan out too well for me. And I got a ass whooping of epic proportions, 80 to 109. So I'm looking to bounce back this week, and hopefully I'm able to. So next we're going to move on to the name that I will not mention because of my standards. As with pretty much everybody else in the league and anybody else who comes along. So you guys can say this name over here. I'm just going to go with, from henceforth going forward, with Isaiah's team, since you all know him from week 1. If you watch the show, you know what I'm talking about and who I'm talking about. And so we have Isaiah's team versus Force League. Now this was a pretty lopsided matchup too. We have Derek Carr, who played absolutely wonderful for Isaiah's team. And that's pretty much what held him over. That and the Denver Broncos defense. And a lot of people were questioning the Denver Broncos. They were like saying, oh, the Denver Broncos the same team. Are they going to perform the same way that they did last season? And after that week 1, people were a little bit scared already. And I told Isaiah, actually, I was like, hey, man, you got to hold on to that team. Hold on to that Denver Broncos team, because they're really going to be big. They're really going to be doing something this year. And I just see it. And lo and behold, they had 22 points last week. And he even got this really big lopsided win without getting anything from Jermaine Gresham. And that's basically what happened. I was going to say, I was like, who's over here I was looking for? Oh, no one. This is the wrong team. But even with no help from Jermaine Gresham. He still got this dominant victory. Force is coming off a very struggling week with 60 points. That's very hard, and that's something where you got to pretty much restructure your entire team if you're only putting up that amount of points in a weekly basis. So you're like, okay, what do I got to do? What free agents do I have to attempt to get in? And I'll get into free agent pickups in this free agent pickups from week 3, actually, heading into week 3 after I'm done with this here. So let's move on to the next matchup. The next matchup is the Fundraisers, which is our league manager, our league founder, and you met him last week. That's Phil, and he played against the Murder Boners, who is the second place team from last year. And it's interesting because this week was really big weeks for me and Phil both, because we both lost to these players in the playoffs, and we wanted to really redeem ourselves this year, and it just didn't pan out the way we wanted to the first time we matched up against them. As you can see here, Ben Roethlisberger had a really great game versus Cincinnati. That divisional rivalry is heated, so of course that's going to be big. But I think he was expecting a lot more. I think Phil and the Fundraisers were expecting a lot more out of Matt Stafford. I think he was expecting a lot more out of even Amir Abdullah, where I think really killed him. Is Amir Abdullah was supposed to have a really bigger game versus the Tennessee Titans, but he simply did not, and that kind of hurt him a lot. And of course, the Arizona Cardinals had a phenomenal game with 23 points in their defense, and his Minnesota Vikings had a phenomenal game versus me in week 1. And this week they also had a really good game. They got 12 points, but it just wasn't enough, and he was simply overpowered and overmatched. And the big thing here is, like I mentioned, the Arizona Cardinals, and then again, the performance from Stephon Diggs, which was absolutely not expected, but it happened, and that's pretty much what decided that one there. So now moving on to Never Bowing Down in the Suge Knights, and okay, there we go. And moving on, and this was a close-knit game, and I'm going to jump right into what I think won this game right away, and that is the Houston Texans defense versus Kansas City. I did not expect their defense to perform the way they did that game, but they did perform on a very high level that day, and that got him those extra points. And also the subpar performance and sudden decline of Sammy Watkins for Never Bowing Down. Sammy Watkins has been a player that has been highly regarded as he could be a top receiver in the league, top 5 receiver in the league, but he seems to not stay healthy, and then it just seems like things are not panning out the way for his career that I was expecting to go. I was expecting his career to have a lot more impact at this point, but we will wait and see on that. But right now, in terms of fantasy production, he is kind of he's a hit or miss player. He could have a big week, or he could have an absolutely horrific week like he did in week 2. The big thing for Never Bowing Down, though, of course, was Travis Benjamin with 23 points. Of course, the injuries to Keenan Allen and to Danny Woodhead were tremendous, because those are the top 2 receivers on their team. And now that they're out, if you don't have any San Diego Chargers, if Travis Benjamin or Antonio Gates or someone like that is on your waiver wire, you're going to want to pick them up, because Travis Benjamin, I'd be willing to bet, is going to be getting a whole plethora of targets, probably 10-plus targets a game, I would imagine. And you want to get a piece of that if you're in need for a receiver who's a solid 2, I would say. He has solid 2 potential. I don't think he's going to have much more weeks where he puts up more than 23 points or where he comes in even close to 20 points. But it's still, if you're struggleish and you need another solid receiver, absolutely go with Travis Benjamin. I had him last year for the Browns, and he was absolutely, he did what I needed for him to do. So I don't think you could go wrong there. And so that pretty much covers this matchup right here. It was a very close one, but the Suge Knights go on to win. They move on to 2-0, and Never Bowing Down moves on to 0-2. And now we have the last matchup from week 2, the ESO Legends versus the Ballers. Now this one was very close. Again, it was only a 10-point victory. And I think what ultimately decided this one was obviously the performance of Graham Gano. He had 16 points. Whenever a kicker gets, 10 points, and, ESO Legends kicker got 10 points, and the opposing got 16 points, all you can do is just like, well, you know what, I tried. I just got outperformed. But what really got going for the Ballers is Carson Palmer's play and C.J. Anderson and Julio Jones. That is a tremendous big 3 right there for the Ballers. And though they move on to 1-1, I think he is going to be a sleeper in our league. I think that's going to be something that everybody in the league is going to have to watch out for is the Ballers and that big 3 right there. Also, Odell Beckham Jr. for the ESO Legends could have had a much more bigger week. He had 8.6 points, but he dropped a touchdown pass, which could have really helped ESO Legends here but it didn't in the end because he dropped that pass. And we have, of course, the subpar play of Russell Wilson, which is unexpected versus the Rams. But for those of you who do not know, Russell Wilson is actually 4-4. I think now 4-5 all time versus the Los Angeles Rams. Excuse me. So wasn't that surprising to me? But I know a lot of people were probably expecting a lot more. And Kelvin Benjamin is going to be Kelvin Benjamin all year. I think this year in fantasy is going to be a top 2, top 3 receiver in the entire fantasy land. I just think he's got that potential. He's coming back off injury, and he's here to play. So now I want to move on to transactions. Let's move on to transactions next. Some notable transactions from people. Like, hey, I need to pick up some people because, things didn't really go the way I expected them to go. And some notable transactions that I want to mention real quick, absolutely, is for me was LeGarrette Blount. Picking up LeGarrette Blount. This is now the Friday after the Week 3 Thursday night game, and I picked LeGarrette Blount right up in time for him to get me that 22 points, and I will get into that more later, but it was a great pickup for me. Another good pickup that I'm going to want to pick up on is Tevin Coleman. Tevin Coleman, I think, is one step away from taking Devontae Freeman's spot in the starting lineup, which is sad for me. I have Devontae Freeman. I've been a big Devontae Freeman ever since his breakout year. I had him all last year in fantasy. He was a big part of my success. But this is obviously going to be a split backfield, and somebody eventually is going to start to lose a lot of pickups. And this was a lot of carries. I'm sorry. And he was picked up by our league champion, our defending league champion. The kid got next. Another good pickup for our champ is Quincy Enunwa. Quincy Enunwa, anybody on that New York Jets offense is going to be absolutely 100% useful this year. Whether it's Brandon Marshall, Eric Decker, Enunwa, Forte, even the tight end, you're going to want a piece of that action because their offense is going to be, I think, one of the most devastating this year. So if you have any possibility of getting any parts of that pie, I would absolutely 100% go after that because that is absolutely something that is going to be very key this year. And that is going to be something that people, if you don't have a part of, you're going to be probably sorely missing. And another thing I want to mention is my pickup of Matt Ryan. Picking up Matt Ryan, I think, for me was for a kind of a scared move. I wanted to pick up Matt Ryan because not only is he the number 1 fantasy player in all of fantasy, but he is right now going to be possibly my backup for the rest of the year because I plan on dishing out Tom Brady to somebody in my league for some high value person this year. Excuse me. And Matt Ryan right now, with Andrew Luck being questionable, and I know they're saying, oh, he's not really questionable, but I'm just doing this as a precaution because worst case scenario, Andrew Luck doesn't play. I have Matt Ryan for Monday night versus the Saints, which is a good matchup for him. So I think I'll be in a really good position right there, and I think picking up Matt Ryan for me was really good just to secure that just in case anything happens. I'm still planning on rolling with Andrew Luck, but it's just in case anything happens. Okay, so the last portion I want to go over for this week is the Week 3 and the Week 3 predictions. I'm going to go through these really quick. Except for my game. I'm not going to try and predict my game. With me, I've already got, as you can see, I've already got 25 points here. I've got 25 points, and that's huge thanks to LeGarrette Blount rushing for 105 yards and 2 touchdowns. And that really put me out ahead at a good spot like I was last week. And I just went over how that ended for me. So I'm not counting my win yet. But this is a huge matchup for us. You can see both of us, we're both 0-2. Me and ESO Legends. And going down 0-3 in fantasy is never a good thing. So we're both going to be pushing hard for this victory. We absolutely want this victory because, like I said, going down 0-3, especially in this cutthroat league that we play in, is very, 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 very hard to come back from. And neither of us want that. I had Will Fuller in the game. He had 31 yards. While he didn't get the yards or the numbers that I wanted, he did get the targets, and that's very good going forward, even though I no longer believe in Brock Osweiler because after that abysmal performance versus the Patriots, it just seems like he's not worth the $18 million that they are paying him. And I think the ceilings for Will Fuller and for DeAndre Hopkins are not going to be met until they get a different quarterback. And that might not even be this season. Let's be honest. And over here, we've got Russell. You've got Russell Wilson matched up. That could be a good matchup for ESO Legends. Odell Beckham Jr. might be held in cap because I think Josh Norman gets into his head when they're going up against Washington. He usually rises to the occasion, but him and Josh Norman have this little real rivalry thing going on where I think Josh Norman is kind of winning that right now, and he's kind of in his head. And hopefully he gets Corey Coleman out of there because Corey Coleman's going to be out for at least 4 weeks, at least a month and a half probably. And he can always rely on Kelvin Benjamin. Kelvin Benjamin, like I said, Kelvin Benjamin is going to be Kelvin Benjamin, I think. And I think those are going to be some deciding factors right there. So let's move on to the Kid Got Next, the Murder Boners. This is the championship game from a year ago. And if I were to predict this one, I'd go with the Kid Got Next simply because I like the home matchups here better. I like Drew Brees at home. I like DeMarco Murray at home. And even though Tevin Coleman is playing on the road, I like Tevin Coleman going up against New Orleans. I think that is going to be a very good game for him. I think that could be that game where he ends up snatching Devontae Freeman, which I hope not. But that's just my prediction. On the other side for the Murder Bonus, we got Ben Roethlisberger going up against Philly. Another big game that could happen is a big player who could have a big game is Ezekiel Elliott. Ezekiel Elliott going up against Chicago. We all know Chicago is not the best team out there in the football world, so we're going to have to look out for that. And then, of course, Stephon Diggs going up against Carolina. It's not going to be last week versus Green Bay, going up against a much tougher defense, so I don't know how much that is going to play into it. But if I were to predict this one, I'd say the Kid Got Next excuse me. I'd say the Kid Got Next will move on to 3-0. The Murder Boners will move on to 1-2. So next we have the Suge Knights in Force. And here we see Suge Knight has an 11-point lead already. That is partially due to Lamar Miller's night of 80 rush yards and 27 recorded yards, catching yards, of course, passes. And this one is going to be tough to call. I'm not going to really go and say who I think could win this one. The predictions got this pretty close. But at the end of the day, I think the Suge Knights are going to take this one simply because I'm looking at these two rosters right here. And I think he has simply the better roster. I mean, his running backs, Jeremy Langford, David Johnson, are better, in my opinion, than Thomas Rawls and Spencer Ware. They just are. And I think with Lamar Miller already having a good game, a lot of this is going to ride on the performance of Antonio Brown. We're going to see which Antonio Brown comes out. It could be the very dominant Antonio Brown, or it could be the very not dominant Antonio Brown. More than likely, it's going to be the dominant Antonio Brown because he almost always shows up. And he shows up for about probably 12 of 16 games a year in the recent years. So I'd expect that to be a big deciding factor. I think this one's going to rest on how well Antonio Brown does. So, okay, so next we are going to move on to DeBallers and Isaiah's team. Isaiah's team here has some pretty good matchups. Derek Carr, AC/DC's got that AC/DC matchup. They could be in for a good game this week, but that's pretty much all he's riding on. Melvin Gordon could be this year's biggest breakout star. I think he's going to have a phenomenal game versus Indianapolis, and that could solidify my possibly prediction of that coming true. I think Isaiah's team is going to take this one because we got a lot of questionables. We did not practice. We don't know if Julio Jones is going to play. We don't know if Delaney Walker or Alshon Jeffrey is going to play. And that could cause them to jumble some things up. And some players might play, some players might not play. And I think it's too much for the Ballers to really deal with this week. And he's got a lot of things that on his plate right now with having to deal with these injuries. And if the people don't play, I think it's too much. So I think Isaiah has an advantage here. And if I were to call this one, I think Isaiah's team would take that one. Moving on to our last matchup. We have Never Bowing Down in the fundraiser. And the Never Bowing Down has an 18-point start off. Primarily and solely due to that impressive Patriots defense that held that shutout versus the Texans on Thursday night. It was unexpected, but he did the right call in putting in that defense, and I honestly think that was a pretty lucky draw. Pretty unlucky draw for the fundraisers over here because we have DeAndre Hopkins who really didn't do that much. And I know he was banking on DeAndre Hopkins to do a lot more than he did, but it simply did not play out that way, and he's going to just have to move on with other players and rely on players like Larry Fitzgerald. and Dez Bryant to have very big games. And then, of course, his defense, I think, are going to be key factors for the fundraiser. I think it's time that Todd Gurley has a very, very big game. And I think it's time for this to happen. So I think Todd Gurley is going to have a very big game versus Tampa Bay, even though they're playing in Tampa Bay. And Cam Newton is going to have a phenomenal game in order for the never bowing down to take this one and prevent him from moving down to 0-3, which, again, like I discussed earlier, would be absolutely horrifying. And just nobody wants that. Nobody wants that to happen. But it's guaranteed to happen to one person. Either me or ESO Legends is going to go down 0-3. And so it's going to happen. And it'll be interesting to see how that person takes that, whether it's me or whether it's ESO Legends. So that's all I got for you guys this week. I hope you guys enjoyed the new format. This is how I pretty much plan on going forward with this show, this type of format. Get you guys much more involved in the league visually so you guys can kind of see what's going on. And, of course, I hope to have more guests soon, hopefully starting next week. Excuse me, sorry, something in my throat. And if I don't, of course, I will still do the show by myself, and I will still be doing this every week, no matter what. This show will still be going on. But hopefully, like I said, hopefully we can get some guests on next week, and we can move forward with that and have another good time with some more guests and get other people's from the league's opinions on what's going on. But it will be structured like this, just with guests. So hope you guys enjoyed it, and thank you everybody so much for watching. And if you enjoyed the video, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to my channel for more content like this. And I will see you guys in the next video. Until then, I'm Demetrius Mack, and I'm out. Peace.